Hello, and welcome to the delicious recipe here on UPRN. This one's called A Thermos of Coffee, and this will be airing Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are on the new channel Roku that they've just added in, and that's you can find that channel on Roku. It's UFO Paranormal and United Public. That's the name of that if you're looking for that in there. And you can also find us on YouTube. It's UFO Gods and Extraterrestrials and UFO Paranormal Radio. That one's done twice. You can also find if you're on Facebook, you can check it out. It'll air on my delicious recipe part on Facebook, and we're also on United Public Radio, UPRN, on all the rest of the podcast platforms that are out there: iHeart, Speaker, SoundCloud, etc. So there's lots of places you can track us down and check us out. And I'd like to welcome there today. I have author Donald Altman coming on here, a former monk. This is and then the psychotherapist, which is sort of very interesting progression of field. Mine has been very vast, as you all know. But welcome, Donald.
Oh, Dell. Well, thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here with you. And yeah, I spent some interesting time in a monastery. It was a Theravada Buddhist monastery, and it was really the beginning of a new life journey for me, I guess you'd call it.
Okay, and then so yeah, how long were you there for?
I like to say that I was right for the experience. I wasn't there for a real long time. In that tradition, you don't take a lifetime vow. It's kind of like, okay, I vow to stay here today. I vow to be here the next day. And every day is kind of a commitment to be there. So I kind of went in thinking it would be for a period of time. I always felt that more of my work would be out here. So I was in there for a few months, but when I left, I continued to work with one of the monks and continued to do some training with him. But like I say, I think I was right for the experience. I went in because I had met this monk that was a Burmese monk called Uthilananda. And when I met him, as a friend that said, I think there's a monk you would like to meet. Now, that may be a cautionary tale, Del, because after I met this monk and I ended up in the monastery. But I think, and the reason I think why that happened is twofold. One, I'd never met anybody like this before. I mean, imagine somebody that had such a palpable sense of compassion that you could actually sense that their openness and their availability and their wanting to help, right? And this person had that. And the second thing was I had gone through a series in my life of kind of destructive patterns where the same thing kept repeating in my life. And finally, it hit a point where I was in my 40s. I was like, and I had therapy before, and that was helpful. But I got to a point where it was like, I've got to dig more deeply and find out, why is this pattern repeating? And hey, who doesn't have patterns that repeat, right? Everybody's got a blind spot. There's something that we don't see about ourselves. And so I went into the monastery hoping that I would kind of get to know my mind better. And I've since learned that mindfulness is kind of like a way to make friends with your mind, but it's a way of healing. As mindfulness as it's taught is kind of like yoga nowadays. Oh, you'll feel good and you'll stretch your mind out a bit here and there and get more flexible. But the real purpose of mindfulness is to reduce suffering. And if you go back to the ancient word mindfulness, which is in Sanskrit, sati, S-A-T-I, the original meaning of that word is self-remembrance and self-recollection. So it's kind of like bringing the fragmented parts of yourself together and finding your wholeness again. It's beautiful. And it's a way of understanding yourself that you can reduce your own suffering and then try to do what you can to reduce the suffering of others while you're at it.
So this part that you went into the little I won't say stint, but this time that you went in for
you could call it a stint.
Okay. But were you already a psychotherapist beforehand, and you needed no? So you were doing something beforehand, and then you went to that, and then that led you into this. I guess I should also mention out there for people that are listening there too is that you've written over 20 books. This book that we'll be talking about in a little bit here, Travelers, is a book of fiction, but you've written books on mindfulness. You're also an Emmy award-winning author too as well. So you do have a bunch of literary stuff beforehand. So was it books beforehand, then monk, then
Well,
psychotherapist?
it's kind of interesting. I mean, I was a writer before I became a monk. I was a
Okay.
professional writer, and I wrote a lot of marketing materials, a lot of things in video, but I also had done some documentaries, had a short film produced, and like you say, I had been a writer on a show that won a couple of Emmys it was a children's show produced by CBS in Chicago. And so that was early in my career, but I had continued writing. But what happened is becoming a monk turned my writing career in a completely new direction. And that's when I started to write all the mindfulness self-help books. So when I
Hmm.
got out of the monastery, um, I'd always been a mindless eater. And when I went to the monastery, I learned a lot about mindful eating. And, it's not what we're eating, it's what's eating us that
Right.
determines what we eat. And so, I was an emotional eater. So when I got out of the monastery, and in fact, while I was in the monastery, I wrote a book called Art of the Inner Meal, which was one of the pioneering books in the mindful eating field. And that was back in the late 90s. And so I started doing workshops on mindful eating, spiritual eating. But what would happen is, people would come up to me after the workshop and they kind of come up and whisper in my ear, I've got this eating disorder problem. I have this anorexia, this bulimia. And I'm like, whoa, I don't know how to answer these people or how to work in this way. So I
Mm.
decided to go back to school when I was about 50 years old into grad school again. And that kind of was somewhat of a frightening experience. I didn't know what it was like to go back to school at that age, but,
Yeah.
uh, but I wanted to find a way to help people therapeutically. And the timing was good because, I wondered when I went into grad school, gosh, how are people going to take this mindfulness thing and this whole meditative stuff, which to me was very healing and it helped me tremendously. And I was wondering, how are we going to use that therapeutically? Is that going to be acceptable? And it was just around the time when, mindfulness-based stress reduction was happening a lot, and John Kabat-Zinn, and there was a lot of new research around mindfulness and depression, mindfulness and anxiety, so forth. So the timing was perfect for me to enter the therapy field and to bring in these ideas related to mindfulness. So after I graduated, I actually worked in an eating disorder clinic for about 4 years and also a psychiatric um, clinic. And so having that experience and writing a lot of nonfiction books, I wanted to reach people in a new way. And that's kind of what prompted me to write Travelers. I felt that, sometimes you read a story a fictional story, and it grabs you in a way that nonfiction can't. And this story just kind of like grabbed me, actually. I like to say that the story wrote me. I didn't write the story.
Right.
Uh, and so it takes people into the world of a psychiatric hospital. A lot of people wonder, what's it like in there? And so you'll get an actual, I think, a realistic sense of what is it like to enter that world. But the story is about a psychiatrist, and it's not me. People have read the book and said, "Oh, that's you, isn't it?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not a psychiatrist for one thing." I said, "But no, that's not me." But it's a psychiatrist who has suffered a great loss. He lost his daughter in the story, and he is grieving this agonizing loss, and he's unable to heal himself. And here's somebody who's helping other people, but he's struggling, and it's
Hmm.
driven this death of the daughter, driven a wedge between him and his wife. So he's really kind of struggling on a lot of different fronts until he meets this kind of mysterious traveler. And it's kind of a synchronicity that happens. He meets this traveler, and she has a sentient canine, a little spaniel that's on her shoulder all the time. And at the same time, there's uh, a patient, a young patient who's suicidal who comes into the psych ward, and he has visions or hallucinations of seeing this traveler. And so it's kind of this unique synchronicity that ends up drawing him in to beyond his rational mind. He's a scientist, and most psychiatrists will tell you they're very much steeped in the scientific method. And I think the field of mental health actually is kind of in the stranglehold of a materialistic view of things. And so it was also my way to say, hey, we want to help people. We've got to get out of that materialistic viewpoint. And that materialistic stranglehold, it kind of reduces people to a diagnosis. And the treatment doesn't include the spiritual part of their life necessarily. It might. And of course, I would always inquire of patients that I worked with, do you have a spiritual practice? And I try to, see what had worked for them in the past, or what their inclination or proclivity was. And, but a lot of times it's not. And so a diagnosis can, that's what's used to really get insurance billing. That's why there's this big book this book's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, of mental disorders. And so you look through this big book and you say, oh, this patient's got these symptoms, so I'll give them this diagnosis. Now and that can help a clinician actually develop a treatment plan, so it has a benefit. But the downside of that, of course, is, let's say you're the patient and somebody says to you, oh, you've got a major depressive disorder here, or you've got anxiety, or you've got schizophrenia, or an eating disorder. Well, I've had patients who would come to me, walk through the door and say, oh, I'm a anorexic, I'm a schizophrenic. I mean, they've identified themselves with that label, and that's doing a disservice to them, I think, and limiting how they see themselves. So
well, that's been a part there that I believe that it's sort of has come up with. I'm not sure how it is with if whether this is a Gen X thing or the millennial thing, is this whole labeling that you have to be into this sort of well, I am this, I am that, and you see this a lot. Well, you see this now even in social media about what group you're in, and I guess that comes into very I guess when you're starting to self-diagnose yourself, that can get into some very tricky psychological problems, I guess, in a way there too, because you've already affirmed yourself to, this is how you are, this is the reasons for my problems, and you've skipped steps on how maybe you can correct path beforehand and maybe not go down that route maybe.
Well, you raise a very interesting point about social media. So once we identify with that identification or that label, we defend it, right? You start defending it, and you become contentious, and you become less willing to listen to others, right? Or you've got to have the same labels that I have. Well, that doesn't really help us to understand others. It doesn't help us develop compassion, does it?
No. And plus also it gives you a sort of a self-excuse for the reason you are that way, right? Everyone can say, well, the reason that they don't go and take the garbage out is because they have OCD, because I've been self-diagnosed this way, or this is the part, and I got a pill that I can take, and this is it. And you brought up a good point there, is that I guess with the part with the medical field is that it's, I guess in North America pretty much has become very heavily pharmacy based and insurance claim based. It's all about the dollar. And I guess looking at the part of self-help, fitness, exercise, fresh air, and I think there's also part there about meditation and taking a step away from technology, why becoming unplugged is a thing to sort of look at, is that I guess people can't deal with themselves.
Wow, you really nailed some really important concepts there about self-care, and and how important it is to unplug so we can reflect back, reflect into ourselves, have an interior life. I think that what's happened is that we're looking outward all the time. And we're looking at our phones, we're looking at screens, and I think is the average American adult looks at screens about 6 hours a day, But if you look at the 8 to 18, I think it's the 8 to 18 or 8 to 28, 8 years old to 25, it's about 7.5 hours a day are spent
Wow.
looking at screens. So we're kind of losing this ability to wire up the brain through face-to-face connection, and that's how this prefrontal, this area of the brain that is really the most human part of the brain behind the eyebrow ridge and the
Hmm.
kind of underside part of the brain, that's where we get empathy from. That's how we, wire up for social connection and self-knowing awareness and intuition. So it's a very important part of the brain, and I think um, inadvertently we may be kind of neglecting developing that part of the brain. And I remember the time I was in an airport, and it was kind of a surprising thing. I was going very early in the morning to get. I used to do a lot of seminars around the country, across Canada, and it was like 6, 7 in the morning or so. I was waiting for the flight, and in the terminal I saw a woman with her child. The child might have been 5 years old or something, but the woman had her phone and she was really totally engaged in her looking at her phone. She must have been texting somebody. She was kind of smiling and laughing, but her kid, her poor child, kept looking up and trying to get her mom's attention. The mother would just ignore, say, like, wait, and just
Hmm.
come back to her phone. And I thought, I wonder 20 years from now if this child who has been, didn't get the attention, the need, and the care that she needed, what's that relationship going to look like? Right.
Well, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Or you
well,
think about,
even yeah, even that part about well, you see now with with this addiction that a lot of the youth are having there with this technology and being on social media, is that it's almost like a false sense. This way I look at it, anyways, it's almost like a false sense of community because you are alone doing a thing, talking to people that you don't see for a sort of connectiveness through technology, but you've lost that physical connectedness through verbalize and touch and talk and meeting somebody and having interaction. Because now, like, well, we're both on a screen here right now as we're talking and that, and we're
yeah,
not in the same room, but it's a very different conversation when you have someone in front of you and you have that flow of energy in between, in a space, and you
right.
see
Yeah,
reaction and you see mannerisms and stuff like that and how things react. And I guess you also, with being a therapist there too, is that if you were dealing with patients there on on a video thing versus seeing them in your office or something like that, you would get maybe a different perspective, or maybe just the feeling of. I think people feel afraid when they have connection face to face. It's a very different attitude and very different way to be, because you see that even with online bullying. People can say all they want to say behind a computer screen,
absolutely. Absolutely. I,
but when they, yeah, go ahead.
well, I had some experience with that, of having clients who there's this whole telehealth thing, right?
Hmm.
And I know people who've had telehealth, and but I think it just goes. It's kind. They give you a lot of homework. It's very kind of manualized, and it's not as personal as it might be. When you're in the same space with somebody, and people can see that they're private. They're willing to share more about themselves than they are over a screen,
Hmm.
because I think it's just natural. So I had clients who I had in practice, but then who moved away and said, they were living in a more rural spot, and they said, I want to continue to see you. And so I saw them. We worked on a screen, but it was not the same. And I mean, I already knew these people, but I could not see their entire body, and I wasn't close up. I didn't feel, sometimes you pick up on the smallest little things
Hmm.
when you're with somebody. And
Hmm.
again, the sharing is different when you're in the same room with somebody. So I hope that people, can return, or are able to, are willing to meet again if they're seeking help, or just to have friends. To, how many of those people that anonymously, yeah, you're on the same chat with them or whatever, but if you really need help, how many of them are going to show up for
Right.
you?
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
exact. Yeah. I I think looking back to the part that you said there about, I guess whatever you've taken from being a monk, and then how do you sort of pull that in towards being a therapist? Is there any sort of connect? Because Buddhism and stuff like that is dealing with a lot of, I guess, sort of self-reflection, meditation, disconnection, being alone. Like people have a hard time being alone, but then also there's also a need and want to be together, and we sort of see this falseness now with technology of being together, but you're actually alone, but pretending to be together. It's sort of a very weird dynamic that we sort of progressed, and this is recently, I guess, in the last 20 to 30 years, when basically the internet and the World Wide Web and social platforms sort of came into being to where they are right now.
Yeah, I think that the alone together thing is a really good saying. I think there was a song with that title some years ago, but it's an interesting dynamic. And for example, I think it's important to make sure that in your life you have time to connect face to face with the people in your life. A lot of people are at the computer, or maybe their partner comes in the house or the kid comes in and they stay on the computer. I think it's important as a ritual to get up, leave the computer, greet that person face to face, give them a hug. How was your day? Right? And get some immediate feedback from them. What's the message when you come in and somebody doesn't greet you? Right?
Right.
I mean, and the same thing when leaving. I found that these little rituals, when you embed them in a relationship, can really create a lot of togetherness and connection, right? I mean, we're so mobile nowadays, moving from one place to another, but when you leave or when you come in, that's an important time to engage with somebody face to face, or give them a touch on the shoulder or a kiss or something to say, we're going to stay connected even though you're not here.
Right. Like I even think back to, well, I was born in 1970, grew up the first part of my 10 years in Southern Ontario around Toronto, Mississauga area. And every Sunday, my dad's side of the family would meet at his parents, my grandma and grandpa's, every Sunday, and be family dinner. And everybody that was the side of the family that sort of lived around that area would come there every Sunday. There'd be a big meal and they'll meet and talk. And there'd be family. And then with my own family there, we all had dinner together. Didn't have breakfast together, lunches. People are doing different things during the day, but always at evening time, have dinner and sit down and eat, whether it was for the 10 minutes or the 20 minutes or whatever, just to sit down. And you see that a lot now with, we're not a 9 to 5 world anymore. Things are, we're not even a Monday to Friday world anymore.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Like it's not like I worked night shift for almost about 2.5 years, and I worked on different schedules from a lot of my friends and stuff like that. But the way that the world is now, it's not the same thing as it was 50 years ago, where it was Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and you had this sort of set patterns. And now we don't really have that really anymore at all. Everybody's in a race to get nowhere fast. And that's what it sort of seems to be like that.
Well, the families used to have time to get together at a meal time and kind of report and catch up on their day and connect on what was happening, right? But actually, there was some research that was done. It's kind of interesting. They put some cameras into different kitchens in people's homes, and they watched how they were eating. And it was kind of one at a time. Somebody come in, put something in the microwave, eat and leave, and somebody else would come in, but they weren't connecting, and they weren't sitting around a table anymore. I really think it kind of happened when the TV dinner trays came in back in the 50s, and the circle of the family kind of opened up, and we all had our little tray and watching TV. So
that's exactly right. Yeah, that was the whole part. They came what was it, latchkey kids and stuff like that. When the parent family, they can no longer have the mother at home that took care of the household. You had to have a 2-person income to deal with the way that the inflation and the economy and everything that were going, because it was no longer that you had the one adult that was doing the job and then one to take care of the home and the kids and stuff like that. This sort of balanced family unit that is sort of very drastically
Hmm.
sort of has shifted away from that. Whether it's been for I don't even know. It's sort of it's a weird sort of thing that's not even looked at anymore. In a way, is like I think there was a stat there is that they asked a bunch of males about marriage and stuff like that, even females and that about looking about being married, and the divorce rate is over 50%. And it says, well, what's the point out of that? You work and you lose all your money. Like it's not
Uh-huh.
looked the
Yeah.
same way anymore as it was 40, 50 years ago.
It's interesting, and I think we need to look at some of the history of this. Back in the 1940s, there was a sociologist by the name of William Ogborn. William Ogborn was at Columbia University, University of Chicago. He was a well-known sociologist. And think about that time. Technology was just beginning to take hold. I think microwaves were like the size of a refrigerator
Right.
right now. And and so technology was really just starting to come in, and he had an idea. He called it culture lag. He believed that when a new technology came into our lives, it would take up to 6 years for us to assimilate it, learn how to work with it in our families and in our culture. But think about
Yeah.
it. The average cell phone now has about a 6 month developmental cycle, and a new one comes in, and there's
Right.
new stuff to learn. And I have a son. It's actually a bonus son, my wife's son. And now here's a young kid, right? He's 23, 24, and yet he says that, God, they keep changing the apps all the time. Even he's having a hard time keeping up with everything, and he's of
Right.
that generation.
Hmm.
But so how do you have time to even assimilate it and learn how to bring it in a thoughtful way? That's why I
Hmm.
like to have people do what I call a exploration of time spent, to actually think about. And I
Hmm.
have a little chart I have, and I give that away for people who want it. But that exploration of time spent just kind of breaks down different activities throughout the day. And then you make a note of how many, in 15-minute increments, how much time do you spend doing that activity. And
Hmm.
I've had people look at that, and one category is uninterrupted face-to-face time with your partner, with a
Right.
significant person in your life. And I've had people who did this, and they said, well, can I count the time that, during the commercial on, when I put it on mute? That's the
Hmm.
only time that obviously they had face to face with their partner. And, that would give me pause. So I would have had people, though, who looked at that and filled out this little inventory
Yeah.
and said, wow, I've got to make some changes. I didn't realize that when I got this new computer, I stopped using my bicycle. I stopped engaging
Hmm.
in this or that activity. And they
Yeah.
said, I really don't want to do that. I need to rebalance. So it's not
Oh.
a blaming or shaming of ourselves, but it's just like, we need to increase our awareness quotient as to
Hmm.
how we are using technology. It's great. It's a wonderful, amazing thing that we can even have this conversation like this, Dell.
Yeah.
And at the same time, though, we need to have healthy boundaries with it and make sure we're still maintaining those personal connections and giving them the time they require.
Oh, for sure. I've said this many times here on the show, and that is that technology should be an accessory, that is a tool to use to help you uh, in whatever endeavor you're
Mm,
doing, whether it's finding information or finding out whatever how to go and change a tire. You can get a video and stuff like that as an accessory. It should not become a thing that it's another appendage. And I just I've mentioned this before. There was a TVO special a bunch of years ago, and they had taken a bunch of people from Southern Ontario, different age groups, genders, and stuff like that, and they'd taken them out camping, and they'd gone and they had to go and surrender their cell phone, their laptop, their iPad, any sort of technology device that they had there. And they took them out. They had to go and live in a tent, make their own food, gather their
mm,
own water. And this was only going for like a week or 2 weeks. I can't remember how long this went for. And the meltdowns that happened in the first 20 minutes of people that were had to
mm,
disconnect from that device and not being on social media. I guess they sort of related that to being like a dopamine rush, that this finding
yeah.
out. And that's weird, because if you're dealing with addictions there too, is that if you're getting some sort of I guess I guess, a dopamine rush or some sort of thing from that as addiction. And you look at other people that are taking addictive pills and stuff like that. You gotta have to sort of put some sort
Yeah.
of semblance into both of these things.
Your story about going out to the wilderness reminds me of an actual study that was done. They actually showed that they tested preteens for their ability to notice facial expressions and and emotions,
Hmm.
and their scores were very low. They were not very good at it at all. So they took them to an outdoor camp. They took away their screens, and for a week they had to relate face to face with their peers. And at the end of the week at that camp, they were retested for their ability to notice facial expressions, emotions, and they regained those abilities in just
Right.
a week.
Wow.
So it shows you that the brain, we're wired for it, but
Hmm.
over technology use muted those skills. And it's critically important for young people to develop the ability to navigate their emotional world, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of information out there that we know enough that we need to, and I guess it's going to fall on parents to kind of do that because, uh, who else will teach those lessons?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, well, when you see the brain is a very, very complex computer in itself there, that which is that can actually help the body. And I think there's a lot parts there is that mind over matter, and a part there with self-healing that can happen. Like you have people that get into accidents that have major brain injuries. The brain will rewire itself to allow
Yeah,
certain things to go. Like we barely scratched the surface on understanding, I think, the brain and its full capabilities to the supercomputer that it is, which is sort of really, really amazing. And this gets into the part with mysticism and Buddhist stuff. There is that way that they sort of looked at things there and energy flows and stuff like that. And people, I guess the part I'm sort of getting towards there is that have you found that with people in your profession there as a psychotherapist there is that the profession has sort of moved more to we've diagnosed a problem, here is the drug, instead of looking at things about how to self-help.
well, psychiatrists and some psychologists and some nurse practitioners are prescribers. So they may be more apt to prescribe a medication to solve an issue, whereas social workers, or I'm a licensed professional counselor, we're more likely to work with the underlying dynamics and deal with the conditions of what created this, what are the roots of this problem, how can you grow as a
Mhm.
result of this, whatever it is that you're suffering with. So it's a kind of a different approach, and I'm not going to say that one or the other is the better here. I think
Mhm.
sometimes both work in conjunction. But let's take the idea of healing from grief, for example. So grief is something that for the first time, and grief is key actually in travelers, because this psychiatrist, again, has lost a daughter. He's dealing with this grief, doesn't know how to handle it. But grief is something now that the field, if you don't heal within a year, they have something now they call prolonged grief disorder. In other words, there's something wrong with you if you don't
Wow.
heal within a year. And I think that is wrong. It's caused a lot of controversy in the field, actually. There are a
Hmm.
lot of grief experts who believe that's wrong. It's stigmatizing grief, isn't it?
Oh
And
yeah.
who are we to say that if you lose a child that you won't grieve for a lifetime?
Hmm.
And even as somebody who was steeped in Buddhist thinking, so um, there's yes, attachment to something can cause suffering, but also sometimes we need to stay attached, as long as that attachment doesn't keep us from moving forward in other areas of our life. So, some people view grieving as a love letter, a letter of caring to the person who you lost, right?
Hmm.
And so you keep that memory alive, and uh, and yet at the same time, that's not exclusive from also enjoying your life and moving your life forward in other ways. And that's what I think the kind of the crux of that story in Travelers is, how does this guy do that? How does he connect. And what happens is he gets beyond his rational mind and discovers that there's a spirit of his daughter that he's actually connecting with. He has to take a mystical journey to do it. He has to leave his ordinary daily reality. I think what happens, and I've been fortunate in that way from doing the meditative practices, that once you still the mind, once you quiet the mind of all those thoughts, and I like to ask your audience, how many thoughts have you had today? Did you ever try to count the number of thoughts you had in a day? Right?
Yeah.
Probably it's possible because average person has at least 20,000 thoughts a day, right? And how many of those thoughts tell you something really profound or helpful about who you are?
Yeah.
Right. Most of them are, maybe habitual thoughts, conditioned thoughts, or sometimes just distressing thoughts that research shows that our mind just will generate distressing thoughts. But once you're able to still your mind and create silence, you can connect with other kinds of awareness, you can call them transcendental realities or whatever you want to call them, the mystery, the wonder, your spiritual nature, whatever you want to call it, but you're able to not just be limited to this more material viewpoint.
Well, I think I'd watched an earlier part of a podcast that you were on there, and I guess you'd come up with something was like a 3 minute I guess meditation parts during a daytime that you could sort of people could do to sort of I guess it's a part about is self-reflecting, I guess, and sort of quieting themselves and getting disconnected out of that. And I was when I heard this, this is interesting. I like what your thought about that, but I can see part of this is that if you look through with school, you look at the lifetime of a child and going into an adult, is that we've sort of pulled ourselves away from our rest breaks. Like when you go to school, you had your recess, your lunch, your recess, and you went home and you did whatever. But your recess were never put as a quiet time or anything like that, or a self-reflection time or a disconnection time. It's been like that. And then when you go to work, you just go to work, you got your coffee break, your lunch break, your coffee break, and you're always just talking about your work. Yeah, during your break time, you don't have a time for yourself. You're always
Right.
you're still in that. You haven't sort of stopped and taken a breath. And I look at this part as that I've had this realization and stuff like that, and many other people haven't. But people have talked about this too. Is that you come to a problem and you can't solve, you're racking your brain about it, and just walking away from it and doing something else for a while there can sort of reset your mindset and thinking about this and see things in a different way. Or maybe something comes to you that you weren't thinking about before by doing something else. It's sort of this getting out of that stuck pattern that you're in right there.
Creativity is a beautiful human endeavor. And what happens in creativity is the brain creates new connections, right? If you're constantly trying to solve a problem, you're just paving over the same road over and over and over. So stepping away, like you say, is a wonderful way to let my unconscious do it. Let something else work on the problem. I mean, I think that Einstein and so many other people who've solved scientific problems have been able to do that. They'll step back and the idea will suddenly appear to them, or maybe it will come to them in a dream. It's interesting, even in writing this book, there's a shamanic guy, this traveler Traveler Jackie is her name. She takes this therapist on a spiritual quest, a mystical quest. And in doing that, she has to have him, open his mind to new things and give him and he actually gets a spirit animal. Now, when as the writer of the book, I was like, okay, who could be the spirit animal? I wanted this guy should have a nice, strong animal, something like I would like a tiger or a big animal, powerful. And no matter how I tried to push that into the story, it didn't work. And I was like, that's not the right animal. I was stumped. And so I decided, I'm going to walk away. I'm going to let my unconscious do it. So I did a little meditation. I took a walk in nature. I just let it go. And I don't know, maybe like 3 days later, I wasn't even thinking about it. All of a sudden, it popped into my head what that spirit animal is. And actually, you could see it on the cover of the book.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see that.
Yep. Birds.
Butterflies.
Butterflies. Okay.
It's
Yeah.
something I never would have thought of. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, because I let the creative space come in,
Mm-hmm.
and it just worked in ways that I never could have imagined if I had forced a spirit animal in there. So I
Well,
think it's, yeah,
that's actually a really interesting one to actually pick there, because you figure the life of a butterfly from caterpillar to chrysalis to that, and then the cycle of life that goes through there. Sometimes the most innocuous little creature and stuff like that holds the most amount of power. Where we're thinking like tiger, lion, bear,
yeah,
elephant,
exactly.
right? Something big and powerful that's there, but there's sometimes the smallest little things hold the biggest surprises.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole idea of transformation and metamorphosis at a
Mhm.
butterfly, the symbology of that is just very powerful. So yeah, it gave the story a whole new dimension for me. But I think that when we're stuck in life, just to step back and say, the answer's there. Allow yourself to find it in a unusual way. There's a quote that I have in the book from Vivekananda. At one point, the guy's having a difficult time. The therapist, the psychiatrist in the story, thinks he's going crazy because all these things are happening to him, and he goes to see this trusted former supervisor of his, who is a friend of his now, and it's an older woman. And she tells him, she actually quotes the words of Vivekananda, who was a 19th century Indian, a Hindu sage that brought a lot of Eastern ideas to the West in the late 1800s. And he says, and the quote is, the infinite library of the universe is in your own mind.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that beautiful? The infinite library of the universe is in your own mind.
Right.
But if we're filled up with static, we can't reach that library.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because even Nikola Tesla had stuff like that, where the connecting to this awareness through his own mind and through dream and waking dream and dream and stuff like that, which is sort of interesting, and the
Yeah.
stuff that he sort of came up with and advanced society. But yeah,
I'd
wow.
like to actually, that's a good point. I'm going to have to read more about him. Um,
Yeah, because he has stuff there with talking about matters, energy, and space, 3, 6, and 9, the secrets of the universe, and I, it's really interesting parts that go into that. Is that the people that talk about him and do reports on him or books about him is there's always sort of a very one way sort of view of it, not like I think, well, it's basically even how like history goes. History is written by the winner. People
mm,
want to tell their narrative how things are,
right.
and I guess that's the whole thing. Is that you only understand your own reality. I can't understand your reality. I can't
Mm,
see what it is through your eyes, how you experience it, and I think that's. I don't know. It's an interesting guy, anyways. If you go and look into it and how he sort of viewed things and how he sort of connected to uh, his mind's eye into this cosmic awareness and cosmic library.
yeah, there was another guy who was a kind of a spiritual teacher back in the 40s, I think it was, Walter Russell. And this guy was pretty amazing. He had incredible visions that lasted for long periods of time, and he saw a lot of things that, like, it kind of reminded me of that when you were talking about Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
And he would see different shapes and formulations, and pretty amazing. He was a Christian, but he so
Mm-hmm.
was a Christian mystic, and he could see all of these things.
Wow. That's on my show. There have been talking to very different people with different views and stuff like that about their reality and how they view their world, and whether it's through religion or through some sort of pagan mythology, or just how whether it's even with this channel, ghosts and paranormal, and
Mm,
dealing with spirituality, and how I guess everybody sort of can be right in a way, but also I guess it's how you perceive things and looking at how when you have clients that come in there, you notice there how they perceive their world differently.
Yeah, I think part of my job is to see if I can enter their world and understand it.
Hmm.
And I think when you're able to enter anybody's world, they feel understood and there's a connection with them. There's
Hmm.
all these different therapeutic modalities. There's cognitive behavioral, there's, dialectic therapy, there's internal family system. Some of these things actually are mentioned in Travelers.
Okay.
But no matter what the modality is, um, it's the relationship, I think, has been shown to be most important in how somebody heals. If you're going to get buy-in, if you're going to have if you don't have a rapport with somebody, then uh, I don't think your therapy is going to be as effective. So there's
Hmm.
got to be a connection there.
Yeah. I was like, we were just talking before the show there about people being stuck in their little bubble of their of area where they haven't traveled or haven't seen things from a different point of view. And I mentioned before there is that people listening to mainstream media and stuff like that, or just listening to one talking point and not getting a full, well-rounded view or understanding of the question or the answer or the opinion that is going on there. And I think
Yeah.
that has been something that has been greatly lost in recently in the past 10, 15 years.
I think in some way you could think of, here's a great mystery. We don't know where we were before we got here. We're not sure. It's a
Hmm.
mystery what happens after. And some people have ideas of what happens. But while we're here on this transitory journey, we're all travelers in a sense. Even if you
Right.
stay within 5 miles of your home, you're a traveler, you have your own experiences. And I think how wonderful it is to connect with other travelers. For those people, why do you go to another country or another city or another state,
Hmm.
right? You want to meet other travelers, you want to meet other people, learn about how they live and learn about
Yeah.
them, right? And expand
Hmm.
your mind in some way. So so I like to think that we're all travelers in a sense.
Hmm.
We're here. And so we're able to meet other travelers, learn about them, um, and help them if at all possible. So imagine you're off traveling, you don't know the language, you're counting on other people to somehow help you. And we have a lot of technology that will now guide you, but I think again we're missing that human connection. But
Yeah.
that when you're lost, I remember one time years ago, I was part of a traveling program that I was working for, and so I was going to different cities every week. And I remember, sometimes the truck would break down, or um, one time we ran out of gas. We were in the southern states of the U.S., and this officer came and saw we were in distress there, and he said, he helped us get some gasoline. He says, well, it's late. You're not going to get a hotel. Why don't you stay at the police station? We have a cell you can sleep in.
There you go.
And I mean, this was years ago, but
Yeah.
people were open like that.
Oh,
I didn't
very
have there
different.
was no fear,
Hmm.
and so it was like kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen Andy of Mayberry, but anybody's seen that show,
Yeah.
you know, with Andy Griffith and Don Knotts, a little tiny, podunk town, and
Yeah.
so this was like the town where he was at, and the fire department and the jailhouse were all in one little building,
Hmm.
and there were a couple of cots there, and there was a guy who was on the road with me, and so he fell asleep on one of the cots, and this officer said, "I'm going to do my rounds. You could join me if you want." And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." So
Wow.
I went on the rounds with him, and but what I learned back then, I think, and I believe in my heart is still applicable, is I traveled across the country, and then uh, I found that uh, people are decent and
Hmm.
people want to help, right?
Yeah.
And that fear wasn't there.
Right.
And so we need to not disconnect from people. We need to connect
Hmm.
and need to realize that Yeah, sure, there are some things we don't understand. There are some scary things out there, but doesn't mean you stop engaging in life.
Oh, for sure. I've said this before, is that it's funny when you get into these bigger metropolises of people where there's 2.5 million people in a city, that everybody's on top of each other, but they're most disconnected and than people from a small town, right? It's even though they're more jam packed, you know less people there than you
Yeah.
do from somewhere else. And a little saying there is that I remember well, this is a saying that's been said many times, is that sometimes you just need to stop and smell the roses, and just to sort of get off that
Wow.
quick quick little escalator that's rushing you past everything. You need to stop and be aware and see what's out there. I think that's a big part that people have. My wife tells me all the time. There says my brain must be going 5 million miles a second, because I'm noticing everything wherever I go. I'm picking out things, changes of everything that's happened in my environment, my surroundings there, because I'm that maybe that's from the Boy Scouts and my curiosity, adventureness of being a little kid there, to being aware of stuff. But I think people have sort of gotten away from that. We've been too focused in this and
You know,
not
I
seeing everything to the peripheral.
I'm so glad you said that about smelling the rose, because I think that mindfulness is about being in this moment, smelling the rose, but experiencing it as if you've never seen it before.
Hmm.
And you know what déjà vu means, is the feeling of having been there before. But there's also, the French have a term, "je vu," which
Okay.
means never having been there before.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that childhood awareness.
Adventure. Yeah.
Yeah, adventure. So it also reminds me of, when you think about time, there's linear time, and that's chronos time.
Yep.
One thing happens after another, it's sequential and it's causal in some way. But there's another kind of time, it's called kairos time. And kairos is that special moment. Kairos transcends ordinary time. It's almost a dimension of eternal time, right? That special
Yep.
moment. And to, what you're describing, that being present in that open way, time actually, in a way, stops for you. And you've entered Kairos time. And that's a time when synchronicities can come in. That's a time when different kinds of connections can come in your life, and possibility blossoms in that moment. I want to share a quick story. I had a friend who was a counselor in the.
Well, we will have to save this story for the next time there, Donald.
Oh, okay.
We've almost ended on a perfect thing of you talking about time, and we got about a minute and a half left here. This has been so great. This is too bad my show wasn't longer, but we could always have you on again there and continue from
Sure.
there. I just quickly there, just tell people where they can find your book, Travelers, and your other books there too as well, and social media if people want to get a hold of you.
Yeah, Travelers is on Amazon.com. You can find it on Barnes and Noble, any of the online booksellers, or you can order from your local bookshop. You can find out more about all my books at mindfulpractices.com, mindful practices.com. You could sign up for my newsletter, and I also have some online courses, CDs, and things like that available.
Awesome. This
Yeah,
has been great. I really
yeah.
enjoyed this there, Donald.
Oh, me
the,
too, Del.
the time just got away from us there so
Yeah,
quickly. How it goes there. But for all the rest of you there out there listening, they're still to the delicious recipe. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I want to thank my production team, my beautiful trio of Hey You, Kitty Pot, and Blaze. Great listeners, never talk back, and they help out with the show. So thank you very much, and
oh, thank
for
you.
y'all out there, tune in next week there for the delicious recipe, and we'll see you then.